the BMW F900 GS. This is now the best off-roader BMW have to offer. But is that a compliment or a criticism? On the one hand, it's 14 kilograms lighter than the previous model.
It has ample ground clearance, a bash plate, and an obligatory 21-inch front wheel for off-road adventures.
But on the other hand, it has a tiny fuel tank that won't get you very far.
Suspension that requires old-fashioned tools to adjust, not just by the push of a button.
A little non-adjustable windscreen, and tires that look afraid of a dirt road. My fear is that it lacks the technology and luxury you expect from a BMW, especially after paying BMW tax. So after owning just one adventure bike and foiling my motocross career in a single backbreaking incident, I've taken on the responsibility of figuring out if the middleweight GS is worth the BMW tax. And I have just 127 hours before they want their bike back.
Thank you to Rec Watches for sponsoring this video.
In recent years, the middleweight ADV segment has taken things up a notch.
And between the KTM 890, Yamaha T7, Triumph Tiger 900, Ducati Desert X, and Aprilia Touareg 660, I think BMW was starting to feel left out. And their 850 GS wasn't quite cutting it anymore.
And yes, I'm sure I missed your favorite bike. Deal with it.
Enter the 900. BMW's intention was to strip their middle child of unnecessary body fat and give it everything it needs to keep up on the trail. Thus, when BMW Motorrad East Rand in South Africa let me live with one for 5.29 days, I was eager to see how capable it would be. So if you're local and looking for a new bike, used bike, apparel, accessories, or even just a workshop, definitely check out BMW Motorrad East Rand.
Considering I haven't ridden anything even remotely off-road focused in a minute, I was surprised by how few immediate quirks I noticed.
Right away, it's a tad hefty to lift off the kickstand.
And it has that tall seat height that you would associate with off-road pedigree. It's still manageable at just 5'7", but let's just say that it's lucky that I have tippy toes to stand on.
The startup sound was perkier than I expected, and that Acra has a beefy rumble coming out of it thanks to the 270-degree crank that is all the rage these days. Personally, I think it's kind of funny looking. Not as sexy as most Dakar-inspired rigs, but I do love this trophy color scheme. It has a weird-looking rear brake lever. It's meant to offer two different heights that should come in handy when braking while standing versus seated. And finally, those four caps might not be electronic, but they look like they mean business.
The most annoying part of trying to judge how good a modern BMW is trying to decipher the options list. I've already been on an emotional roller coaster with this bike, and it all comes down to how this specific bike was spec'd.
For example, it starts at just $13,500.
But that's kind of irrelevant, given that you can spec it to the moon.
Next, I was excited to see these 43mm Showa forks that look like they came straight off a pro motocross bike with these gorgeous black stanchions, and a fully adjustable Sachs shock with sexy knobs and a remote preload adjuster to accommodate for a heavy passenger or luggage.
However, this suspension isn't on the base model. It's an expensive optional extra.
I was puzzled by the lack of cruise control on this bike.
But it turns out that they can be spec'd with it. But this bike wasn't.
I was surprised by the lack of adjustability on this little windscreen.
But don't worry, it is adjustable. Over on the options list. If you spec the taller one there, it will be taller here. And I think it is actually adjustable on the adventure model. I was also going to comment on the lack of a center stand, which I think takes away from some of the independence that an adventure bike needs. Yet again, it's probably the choice that I would make to save some weight. But this isn't an intentional choice by BMW, but rather an optional extra that's missing. Ultimately, just about all of my complaints with this bike can be remedied with a more complete options list. We live in a strange time, but I also have to appreciate how cool it is that you can customize a bike to suit you to such an extent. Okay, but when you pack away the options list and just ride the damn thing, there are sort of three sides to it in my opinion.
Off-roading, commuting, and touring. Out on the good old generic open road, it's fun, like all motorcycles. Its wide bars and plentiful legroom make it comfortable even for longer stints. Despite the enlarged front wheel, it's intuitive and never sketchy or unstable going through turns at speeds adventure bikes would never have done so comfortably 20 years ago.
And surprisingly, it's really comfortable to squeeze the tank with your knees, which is sometimes harder on an adventure bike. The fact that an 895cc parallel twin is considered a middleweight these days says it all. 105 horsepower is more than adequate in this form factor, especially with squishy off-road suspension. All in all, this engine is very competent, but not very inspirational.
With its mere 8,500 RPM ceiling, it's still faster than 90% of cars on the road. And when you swipe over from road mode into dynamic mode, the engine perks up, both power-wise and engine braking-wise. The throttle response comes out of its coma, and even the quick shifter feels spicier.
On the twistier sections, I was sure that these axially mounted Brembos with only 2 pistons per caliper would be a letdown, but again, they suit the nature of this bike perfectly.
It doesn't make you want to be the next Marquez. So personally, I never got to a corner faster than these brakes could comfortably cope with. Of course, it's aided by twin discs up front and steel braided lines.
But don't forget that although it might be able to tour, that's not its main focus. Buy the 1300 then, or even better, an RT. Its tiny 14.5 litre fuel tank will keep you within about 250 kilometers of a fuel station at all times. And if you need more range from a 900, buy the adventure model.
Presumably, this is so that it shines off-road with less weight. So I clunked it into Enduro Pro mode and mustered all of my Enduro prowess. It doesn't take long to appreciate the lighter fuel load, because it's still a heavy bike off-road. In fairness to it, I haven't ridden here in a while, but initially I was very tentative over rocks in the fear of slicing a sidewall or bending a rim, but that big front wheel rolled over every bad line I accidentally threw at it, and those spokes were up for the job.
I mean, these tires might say adventure on them, but they look like their idea of an adventure is a Starbucks run.
I bet it would be a different beast with knobbly tires, but I felt right at home standing up on it, which is the most important metric on an ADV, even if I wouldn't mind it being slightly narrower between the legs. Enduro Pro mode lets you have your fun before the traction control or ABS steps in, and the rear brake has lots of modulation with that big disc. And by the end of the trail, I was already feeling more comfortable on it and itching for another lap or two, also known as having fun. It really does just feel like a big enduro bike.
So I guess rather predictably, that means that it shines as a commuter as well.
These heavily road-biased tires make it great for urban adventures to work. It lives for the occasional off-road shortcut too. The quick shifter and blipper make it an easy and lazy expedition. It never gets hot in traffic. The height allows you to safely see over cars and far ahead, and the list goes on. Can you see the star at the top of my watch face here?
Well, that was originally metal from the brake and clutch levers on Evel Knievel's stunt bike from 1977. And now it's been forged into a watch. How cool is that?
That also means that even though they only made 736 of these watches, none look identical. You can see the unique divots in the metal.
The whole face also rotates 30 degrees so that it's still facing you even while you're holding the handlebars.
That is what Rec Watches specializes in. They use materials from historic vehicles in their timepieces, including aeroplanes. As a petrolhead, I love this concept.
I'm thinking about sending them parts from my Crash Triumph to make me my own special watch. But this specific Swiss-made watch is called the TTT Knievel because it's made from Evel Knievel's Harley-Davidson XR750 that he used in the shark jump.
Don't forget the blue stitched strap and beautiful mechanisms that I could watch all day.
They're offering you guys 40% off right now with the code CHAOS40. So if you're interested in this eye catcher and quite frankly conversation starter, I'll link them down below. The immediate concern is this lanky suspension intended to soak up roots and rocks on a trail, but probably let you down on the road. That disappointment can be mitigated these days with electronic suspension that can be adjusted on the fly, which means that I didn't have much hope for this setup.
Truth be told, that it didn't let me down anywhere. Not that I got to its limits in any conditions, but I think you would be able to grow a lot as a rider before needing anything better.
But all of that comes a lot later. Much earlier on, you'll notice the 900 GS's styling.
Its side profile is everything you could want from a bike like this, with that short subframe and stubby vertical windscreen that sticks out at the top like a spoiler.
However, am I the only one who thinks that this is a face that only its mother could love?
To be fair, the light bar is pretty cool, and the chrome spokes against the gold rims look brilliant.
The wheels are easily the centerpiece of this bike.
These handguards add to its rugged aesthetic, as do the exhaust headers that conveniently exit beside the engine rather than underneath it for obvious reasons.
I also really like these textured GS logos that are right where your legs go while standing up, giving you extra grip when squeezing the bike.
Even the gear lever with adjustable reach looks cool. I'm not usually a bench seat fan, but this bike pulls it off, especially with these red ribs. But I am a fan of that asymmetric panel join on the tank.
I'm just not sure how I feel about this number plate bracket sticking out so far, but I guess if nothing else, it'll keep the mud splatter down.
The Acra can adds to the premium feel, and that carbon end cap obviously saves a ton of weight. But the most useful feature is probably this USB-C port in the cockpit. Every bike needs that.
And for once on a BMW, it didn't take me very long to grasp all the tech.
It's got the now infamous 6.5-inch TFT that I still think leads the market, paired with the familiar switchgear. But with a lack of electronic suspension and cruise control, there is a lot less within the menus.
I mean, even the keyless ignition is an optional extra. And the heated grips were a lifesaver when it got down to 1 degree Celsius. I'm glad I wasn't the passenger.
As always, I cranked the remote preload adjuster and took my wife with me on my longer ride to get her educated opinion on the passenger amenities.
Seat comfortable. Wasn't me. Comfortable, good shape and squishiness. Pegs low enough and wide enough, not cramped. The passenger seat is a tad higher than the rider seat, which is always comfortable for both people. And apparently the tank is also a good shape and a good height to lean on under braking. But there are no grab handles. It lost a lot of points for this.
In fact, I missed them when pushing this bike around as well. Obviously, it's still way easier than the massive 1300 GS to maneuver, which makes it much more pleasant to live with.
And as for me, the rider with a passenger, it was just as fun and just as competent with the extra kilograms on the back, even though they seemed to wiggle around quite a lot on that day.
At first, this bike perplexed me. It seemed the furthest thing from a BMW I'd ever experienced.
But after just 5 days, I realized that's the point. It's trying to be what adventure riders in this segment need, not what BMW say they should want, which I'm sure was difficult for them to admit.
It's relatively bare bones for a BMW, with a somewhat luxurious twist, of course, but competent nevertheless. It's everything you need, but no more. No extra weight. I have no doubt it's better than the last generation off-road. Not quite as good as a 1300 on a freeway, and an incredible daily rider as a result, because it's light and fast and practical.
Ultimately, in this category, I think it comes down to picking your favorite flavor. If you're a BMW fan, you will love this. If you want something more exotic, buy the Ducati. If you want something more affordable, buy the Yamaha. And if you want to wonder if the company will still be around in a year, buy the KTM. Nevertheless, 127 hours later, the F900 GS is back with Motorrad East Rand, which means we need to give it a score out of 60 to see how it stacks up on the leaderboard.
As you can see, the last adventure bike didn't fare very well.
Styling. I honestly love this Dakar style of bike, but I do think some other brands have done it better. 6 out of 10. Practicality. It commutes well, it off-roads proficiently, it tours acceptably, and it's light enough to maneuver easily. 9 out of 10. Fun. Out on the trail, very fun. But on the road, it's not my idea of fun. 5 out of 10. Price. The BMW tax isn't as high as I expected, but it's still not as friendly on your wallet as a Yamaha T7, for example. 6 out of 10. Speed. For what it is, it's fast, but in the grand scheme of things, it's about average. 5 out of 10. Sound. You can't hear much with the Euro 77 emissions nonsense, but I am a sucker for a 270-degree crank, so 7 out of 10.
Giving the F900 GS 38 out of 60 and placing it deservedly above the old 1200 but below the Turismo Veloci.
But anyway, let me know which middleweight adventure bike you would choose, and I'll see you on the next ride.